Whistleblowers are different from confidential sources. The advice, and the correct advice to whistleblowers, if a whistleblower phones public concern at work, they will be told, do not whistleblow, and that is correct. If you do, it's a life-changing decision. I've worked with a couple of whistleblowers, ironically, one that I met at the Logan Symposium the first one actually, probably about 4 years ago. It's an NHS whistleblower who blew the whistle on IT problems in Southwark NHS Trust. As a result of blowing the whistle, her employers didn't thank her for that. In fact, they bullied her and she was forced out of a job. She lost her partner, she lost her house. But she decided to fight the case in an industrial tribunal. I suppose one thing I learned from that and dealing with other whistleblowers is they are extremely traumatised people, even if they're very together, even if they seem to be able to present a case at a tribunal underneath it, they are really very damaged and they see things through a traumatised lens. So I brought in another journalist on this particular case to work with me because I wanted a different perspective, and we spent probably 2 or 3 days in South Bank Centre just interviewing this person and just going through the whole story. But the key, and she really needed someone to listen to. I mean, in effect, it was like being a counsellor. And it's like Duncan said this morning, you take on this role of sort of pastoral role. But it became the key thing was to get hold of the documents, and because it was going through an industrial tribunal, it's possible to get hold of the documents. And then we spent a couple of days going through documents in the old-fashioned way with sticky notes, but when you go through documents, there is a difference between what the whistleblower actually sees through the trauma of their own view of the situation and what actually happened. So in this particular case, it was an IT system. It turned out to have been developed by the husband of a secretary at the trust, completely amateurish. They didn't know whether the patients they had were alive or dead, yet they were paying for their medical treatment. The records disappeared, etc., etc. She actually lost a case at tribunal. She tried representing herself, didn't work. Most whistleblowers tend to lose tribunal cases. One of the most traumatic was a guy who worked for the Ministry of Justice and went on to his tribunal, and he couldn't take it. And halfway out, he just walked out, and the Ministry of Justice went against him for costs. And he had to move back with his parents. Awful experience, an awful experience for me covering it. I just had to go out and drink a number of gin and tonics afterwards. I don't know how long I've got, but the other things that worry me are the... Keep going. Surveillance. So, and here's Paul Ashmar, who's an expert on this. Contacting sources who may be working in defence or government, I worry about, particularly contacting them by phone, because the technology is out there, and it's metadata rather than what is said. So even using encrypted technology like Signal, it sends out a trace saying, are you Signal to contact this person in government? There's still a link between you, even though the message may be encrypted. And do the government actually spy on journalists? The answer is yes. Theresa May, over Brexit, sent around a memo ordering the security services to seize the phones and emails of anyone suspected of leaking any information about Brexit. It went round to everyone in government, including ministers. We've got the 2015, IOCA produced a report saying the police had spied on 84 journalists and 200 sources suspected of being in contact with journalists and acquired their metadata from internet companies. January last year, Cleveland Police, it was ruled unlawfully spied on journalists on the Northern Echo and the Mirror to find out their sources. March, Jenny Jones, with the Green Party MP, was passed information from a whistleblower about the police being in collusion with hackers in India in order to hack into the email accounts of Green Party campaigners. It's a risk assessment. Not all stories are like that. Most business stories, most stories, you wouldn't have to worry about that. Best advice I was given was from Nikki Hagar, who is a New Zealand investigative journalist who wrote a book exposing the New Zealand Nationalist Party collusion with bloggers to spread propaganda about opposition parties. He said, if you're meeting a source, you don't ring them, you don't text them, and you don't take your phone with you. That's pretty simple. If you contact your source by phone, you're a bloody fool. You're a bloody idiot these days. And I think that's a good piece of advice. I'll probably end there, but I can talk about other stuff if you want.
Great. Okay, that's fantastic. And just to pick up on a couple of things from that, I had the fantastic adventure of being involved in the Edward Snowden stuff. And I had been in Australia for The Guardian when we were opening our Australian office over there, and this coincided with the breaking of the story, and there were various surreptitious telephone conversations from Alan Rusbridger in which he sort of said, I can't tell you what's going on, but could you find us a lawyer in New York who's good on national security? And then I got a message that said, well, you're flying back in a couple of days, and you're due to be changing in Hong Kong. Would you mind staying in Hong Kong for a couple of days? So I sort of go, well, okay, never been there. So I arrive in the middle of the night, have no idea what's going on, and I get woken up the next morning in a hotel. I don't even know, I've never been there, I don't know where I am. And Ewan McCaskill, the Guardian journalist, is at the door, and he says, right, Jill, get up, leave everything, leave your phone, leave your iPad. I know that you're, umbilically tied to your iPad, but leave it in the room. And we go off and we go on the ferry, and we walk around a concrete park for an hour and a half while he tells me what's been going on. Because that was the only way that he felt we could have any sort of safe conversation about the Snowden stuff. Didn't want to do it in a building, didn't want to do it in somewhere where there was too many people around, etc., etc. So, these are just basic sort of things that are journalistic toolcraft. These are things that journalists should instinctively know about. But the techie world has whipped us all up into a different area. And I think one of the things that particularly worries me, which again Bill touched on, is the Investigatory Powers Act allows the state to sweep up great swathes of information, and most concerning on a practical level is it doesn't need to come to a journalist anymore and say, I want you to hand over your source material. It can go to a telecoms provider and say, give me the details on this phone number. And the telecom provider doesn't have to tell us. They're not interested in telling us what's going on. In the old days, under PACE, not brilliant, but it was a solid bit of legislation that had steps in that meant you were told, you went down to court, you argued, at least you knew what was going on. Nowadays, I just say to the Guardian journalists, be really, really suspicious. Just because you don't know does not mean that things are not happening.